I'm too big for you, but she dared the cowboy anyway. Wild West romance series, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the small dusty town of Crescent Ridge. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, but no one seemed to care enough to help when someone was in need. A young girl named Lily stood at the edge of the town's market, clutching a small velvet pouch in her hand. Her pale blue eyes, wide with worry, scanned the crowded stalls. She wore a faded dress that barely reached her knees, and her bare feet were caked in the dirt from the road she had walked all morning. Her mother, once a proud rancher's wife, had been sick for weeks, and Lily knew it was only a matter of time before her condition worsened. They had no doctor, no medicine, and no money to buy food. The only thing of value they had left was the ring her father had given her mother on their wedding day. It was a simple band, gold with a small stone that glimmered in the light. It wasn't worth much in the eyes of the wealthy folks in town, but to Lily it was the last piece of her father she had left. She couldn't bear the thought of selling it, but she didn't see any other way. Her mother had grown weaker each day, and their small shack couldn't keep out the bitter cold of the winter. Lily had made the decision early this morning. Today she would sell the ring. Her heart ached at the thought, but it was the only way she could buy food to keep her mother alive for another week. She walked slowly toward the market's edge, where the town's merchant had a stall full of trinkets and jewelry. The man was known for being fair, though he never gave much for anything. His eyes flicked up as Lily approached, and a frown tugged at his lips. "What have you got there, girl?" he asked gruffly, eyeing the velvet pouch in her hand. Lily hesitated for a moment, her fingers tightening around the pouch. It's my mother's ring," she said softly, trying to keep the tears from rising in her throat. "I need to sell it. For food." The merchant's eyes flicked to the pouch and then back to her face. He didn't ask any more questions, but his expression softened for just a second before he reached for the pouch. He took the ring from her hand and weighed it in his palm. "It's a nice piece," he said, though his tone made it clear that he didn't think it was worth much. "I can give you $2 for it. That's all I can spare." $2 wasn't enough to buy much, but it was all she had. She nodded silently, her fingers trembling as she handed the ring over. As she did, a sense of finality settled in her chest. There was no going back now. The ring was gone, and with it any tie to her father. It felt like the last part of her old life slipping away. The merchant took the ring and placed it in his pocket without another word. "Go on then," he muttered, waving her away as he turned to greet another customer. Lily stood there for a moment, staring at the dust swirling around her feet. The world seemed to close in around her. She could hear her mother's voice in her mind telling her not to be sad, telling her to stay strong, but it was hard. She felt so small in a world that seemed to care so little about her and her mother. With a sigh, she turned and walked away from the market, the $2 clutched tightly in her hand. She walked the streets of Crescent Ridge, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She needed to buy bread and some milk, maybe a few vegetables. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to keep them going for a few days. As she passed the other stalls, she couldn't help but notice the wealth that surrounded her. The fine clothing, the expensive shoes, the shiny jewelry. These were the people who never worried about where their next meal would come from. They didn't know what it felt like to be cold, hungry, and alone. Lily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned around, expecting to see another local merchant or a neighbor, but instead she saw a tall man with broad shoulders and a rugged face. He was dressed in a well-worn cowboy hat and a long coat, the kind of coat that looked like it had been through many winters. His boots clicked softly on the cobblestones as he approached. Lily stepped back, startled by the man's sudden presence. He smiled gently, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You're selling something, little lady?" he asked, his voice low and friendly. There was a calmness to him that made Lily feel like he wasn't judging her. She nodded slowly. "Ah, I sold my mother's ring," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have enough food." The man's expression softened as he looked down at her. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the world on her small shoulders. He didn't know why, but something about her struck him. He couldn't stand seeing a young girl like her in such a situation. "You've done what you had to," he said, his voice full of understanding. "But that ring, it's worth more than just a few dollars." Lily glanced up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" The man crouched down to her level, his face serious now. "That ring was your mother's, wasn't it? I can tell it means a lot to you." Lily swallowed hard, nodding. "It was my father's gift to her." The man studied the ring in her hand for a moment before standing back up. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "I can help you, but I don't want you to have to sell something so precious to your family. Meet me at the livery stable at dusk. I'll make sure you and your mother get what you need." Before Lily could respond, the man turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with a sense of confusion and hope. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the small, dusty town of Crescent Ridge. The streets were lined with old wooden buildings, their paint chipped and faded. The town had a feel of abandonment, like it had seen better days long ago. The wind blew softly through the narrow streets, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant sagebrush. In the market square, the usual crowd of town folk went about their business, talking loudly and making deals. But not far from them, at the edge of the square, stood a young girl named Lily. She was thin, her face pale from days spent in the cold, and her clothes were worn, with patches in places where the fabric had torn. Her shoes were too big, and she had wrapped a piece of string around the laces to keep them from slipping off. In her small hand she held a velvet pouch. It was old and frayed at the edges, but it still held something precious, something that Lily couldn't bear to part with. Her mother had been sick for weeks, and it was getting worse. There were no doctors in Crescent Ridge, and no one in town cared enough to help. The cold nights and the hunger were slowly wearing her down. Lily had watched her mother's condition worsen every day, but there was nothing she could do. They had no money, and the little food they had was nearly gone. Lily had no choice. She knew what she had to do. The velvet pouch in her hand was the only thing of value they had left. It contained a ring, a simple gold band that had once belonged to her father. Her mother had told her the story many times. It was the ring he had given her on their wedding day, a symbol of their love and commitment. But that was years ago, and her father had passed away in a tragic accident on the ranch. Since then, the ring had been the only piece of him left, the only thing that kept her mother's memory of him alive. But now, Lily needed it to survive. Her mother's health was fading, and they had no way of getting the food she needed to get better, so she had made up her mind. She would sell the ring. With a heavy heart, she walked through the market square toward the town's small trading post. She knew that the shopkeeper, Mr. Dalton, was fair, though he wasn't known for paying much. He would likely give her a few dollars at best, but it was better than nothing, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would be enough to keep them going for another week. As she walked, her eyes flipped nervously over the people in the market. She saw a few familiar faces, neighbors who never seemed to notice her unless they were asking for something, but none of them seemed to care about her troubles. They all went about their business, ignoring the young girl with the sad eyes. Lily's throat tightened as she reached the front door of the trading post. She hesitated for a moment, her hand shaking as she reached for the door. She couldn't stop the tears that welled up in her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't let herself cry. She had to be strong. Inside, Mr. Dalton stood behind the counter, sorting through some old books. He looked up as the bell above the door jingled. "Well, well," he said with a smile. "What brings you in today, Lily?" Ellie swallowed hard and held out the velvet pouch. She felt a lump form in her throat as she spoke. "I need to sell something," she said, her voice trembling. "My mother's ring. We don't have enough food." "Mr. Dalton raised an eyebrow and stepped forward. He took the pouch from her hand and opened it slowly, his eyes glancing down at the ring. "Ah," he said, nodding slowly. "It's a fine piece of jewelry. But times are tough. I can't give you much for it." He paused, studying the ring a little longer, as if weighing its value. "I can offer you $2. That's the best I can do." Lily's heart sank. $2? It wasn't even enough to buy a sack of flour. It wasn't even enough to buy the milk her mother needed. But she had no choice. She needed the food, and the ring was all they had left. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what else to do." Mr. Dalton eyed her for a moment, his face softening. "I know it's hard, Lily," he said, his voice gentler now. "But that's all I can offer you." He placed the ring in his pocket without another word. Lily's fingers clenched into a fist as she turned and walked out of the store, the $2 clutched tightly in her hand. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, like a part of her was breaking off and leaving her behind. She had sold the last piece of her father, and with it, all the memories of him. Outside, the wind had picked up, and dust swirled in the air. Lily pulled her coat tighter around her and walked down the street, the weight of the $2 heavy in her pocket. She passed by the town's other shops, each one filled with people who had no idea what she was going through. They walked in and out, laughing and talking, unaware of the girl who had just given away the last piece of her family. Lily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see another shopper or a townsperson, but instead a tall figure loomed in front of her. The man was a cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore a worn leather coat and boots caked with mud, and there was a calmness about him that immediately put Lily at ease. He looked down at her with kind brown eyes. "You look like you could use some help," he said softly, his voice low but warm. Lily took a small step back, startled by his sudden appearance. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice betraying the lie. The man studied her for a moment, then glanced down at her hand, where the velvet pouch had once been. "You sold something, didn't you?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Something precious." Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her heart ached as she looked up at the cowboy. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Let's get you and your mother somewhere safe." "You don't have to do this alone." Lily blinked in surprise. She didn't know this man, but something about him made her believe his words. She hesitated, but then she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. The cowboy gave her a small smile. "No need to thank me, little one," he said. "You and your mother deserve a better life than this." The days had passed since Lily and her mother had arrived at Jonah's ranch, and slowly the world around them began to feel different. Jonah had kept his promise. He didn't just give them a place to stay, he had given them a future. The cabin, though small, was sturdy and warm. The fireplace crackled softly each night, filling the space with a comforting heat. It was a far cry from the cold, damp shack they had once called home. The air here smelled fresh and clean, and the sounds of nature filled the silence. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of a river could always be heard flowing steadily nearby. The land itself was alive with possibilities. Lily's mother, Sarah, had spent her days resting. The fresh air and the peace of the ranch seemed to work wonders for her health. Each morning she felt stronger, though the years of hard work and illness still weighed on her body. But as she sat on the porch of the cabin, her eyes closed and a gentle smile on her lips, she knew they were in the right place. Lily, on the other hand, had thrown herself into the work Jonah had suggested. She helped him with the small tasks around the ranch, feeding the animals, collecting eggs from the chickens, and even helping him with the garden. Though the work was hard, it kept her busy, and more importantly, it gave her a sense of purpose. Jonah had given her more than a roof over her head. He had given her the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to feel useful once again. One afternoon, as she tended to the garden, Jonah came over to her, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. He carried a bucket of water and set it down beside her. "You're getting the hang of it," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. His voice was calm, but there was a warmth in it that made Lily feel proud. "I'm trying," Lily replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood up, stretching her back. "I've never worked on a farm before. I didn't even know how to milk a cow until you showed me," Jonah chuckled. "There's a lot more to learn, but you're a fast learner. You've got the spirit of a real rancher." Lily's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and gratitude. She didn't know much about ranching, but with Jonah's guidance, she was starting to understand the rhythm of life on the land. There was a certain peace in the simplicity of the work. As they stood there, the sun began to set behind the hills, casting a soft golden light across the land. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Lily glanced up at Jonah, who was looking out at the horizon. "Thank you," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "For everything. For bringing us here." Jonah turned to her, his face serious but kind. "I'm just doing what anyone would do," he said quietly. "But you and your mother, you've made a real difference in this place. It's not just the cabin or the work. It's something more. You brought life back to this land." Lily didn't know how to respond. She was still overwhelmed by the kindness Jonah had shown them. He didn't have to help them. He could have easily turned them away, just like so many others had. But instead he had opened his home to them without hesitation. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and small victories. Lily's mother grew stronger every day, and Lily's confidence in herself and her abilities grew as well. She started to feel like this was where she belonged, not just because Jonah had given them a place to stay, but because she was starting to feel at home in the land itself. One evening, after a long day of work, Jonah invited them to dinner. It was the first time they had sat down together as a family, something Lily hadn't experienced in years. The table was simple but full of food: fresh vegetables from the garden, bread baked by Sarah, and a hearty stew that Jonah had prepared. The smell of it made Lily's stomach growl, but it wasn't just the food that filled her with warmth. The feeling that, for the first time in a long time, they were a family again. As they sat at the table, Jonah looked across at them. His eyes were soft, and there was something unspoken in the air. "I've been thinking," he began, breaking the silence. "I'm not just giving you a place to stay. You both deserve more than that. If you want, you could stay here as long as you like. There's plenty of room on the ranch. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." Lily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such an offer. They had been so focused on the day-to-day survival that they hadn't thought about a future that was now possible. "You mean we can stay here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at Jonah with wide eyes, her face full of surprise and gratitude. Jonah nodded. "I'm not offering this lightly, but you're family now. You've earned it." The room fell into a comfortable silence as the weight of Jonah's words settled over them. It felt unreal, like a dream they couldn't quite believe. After everything they had been through, after losing so much, here they were, being offered something they never thought possible. Lily looked over at her mother, who smiled at her softly. "What do you think, Mama?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Her mother's eyes sparkled with tears, but she smiled. "I think it's exactly what we need," she said, her voice steady. "I think we've found our home." And just like that, Lily knew. This wasn't just a place to survive. This was a place to live, to grow, and to be happy. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet, peaceful way. They ate their dinner, talked about the day's work, and laughed about small things they hadn't laughed about in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily felt something inside her that she hadn't felt in years. Hope. He had given them a chance at a new life, a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to start again, and for that, Lily was grateful beyond words. As she lay in bed that night, the warmth of the fire still glowing in the hearth, Lily closed her eyes and allowed herself to drift off to sleep with a sense of peace she hadn't known in so long. Tomorrow would be another day of work, but it would also be another step forward. Another step into the future they had been given. The weeks passed quickly on the ranch. Life had found a new rhythm for Lily, her mother, and Jonah. Every day, the sun rose over the hills, casting its warm golden light over the fields and mountains. Lily had learned more than she ever thought possible about ranching, and with each new task, her confidence grew. She worked alongside Jonah, her hands becoming rough and calloused from the labor, but there was a sense of pride in every task she completed. Her mother, Sarah, had made great strides in her health. The fresh air and peaceful life on the ranch had worked wonders for her. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the weight that had once hunched her shoulders seemed to lift with each passing day. The two women found joy in simple things, cooking together, tending to the small garden, and talking late into the night about the past and the future. Jonah, though a man of few words, never seemed to tire of helping them. He worked alongside them every day, and though he never expected praise, Lily could see how much he cared. His quiet, steady presence had become a comfort to them both. But even as they settled into this new life, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had never imagined a life like this, a life full of peace and possibility. Yet, deep inside, there was a question she couldn't quite answer. What came next? What did the future hold for them here, on this ranch, with Jonah? One morning, as Lily fed the chickens, she noticed Jonah standing by the barn, staring out at the distant hills. He hadn't been working much lately, and she could tell he was lost in thought. She approached him quietly, unsure of what to say, but sensing that he needed someone. "Jonah," she called softly. He turned to her, a small smile appearing on his face. "Mornin', Lily. How's the garden today?" "Good," she said, but her eyes searched his face. "Is everything all right?" Jonah's smile faded, and he looked back at the hills, his expression distant. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Thinking about how much has changed, how much you and your mother have brought to this place." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. "We didn't do much," she said softly. "You gave us everything. You brought us here." Jonah shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You two brought life back to this ranch." "To me too. I've been alone for a long time, Lily. I didn't expect things to change, but they have. And I'm grateful for that, more than you know." Lily looked at him, her heart heavy with emotions she didn't fully understand. Jonah's words were like a door opening inside her, a door she hadn't known was closed. "Jonah, what do you want for the future?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I mean, I know we've all been working hard, and Mama's doing better. But what comes next?" Jonah was silent for a moment, as if considering her question. Then he finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You're asking the right question, Lily," he said. "I've been asking myself the same thing. And I've realized that I don't want to live alone anymore. Not like this. I don't want to go through life without the kind of family I had before." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had always known that Jonah cared for them, but now, hearing his words, it felt like something deeper was being revealed. "I don't have much to offer," Jonah continued, his gaze steady but vulnerable, "but I do have this land, and I have my heart. And I want to share both with you and your mother, if you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, and Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected this, but now that the question had been asked, she realized that this was what she had wanted all along. A place to belong. A place to call home. I don't know what to say," Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already given us so much. You've given us a future. I don't know how we could ever repay you." Jonah smiled gently, his eyes soft. "You don't have to repay me, Lily. Not at all. All I'm asking is if you and your mother would be willing to stay with me. To make this ranch your home, not just for today, but for the future. We can build something here, something real. Together." Lily took a step back, her mind racing. The thought of a life with Jonah, a life without fear and uncertainty, felt like a dream. But it was real. It was right in front of her. And deep down she knew it was the future she wanted. "I don't think I could say no," Lily whispered, a smile slowly forming on her face. Jonah's face lit up with a soft smile of his own. Then it settled. "We're family now, Lily, and family takes care of each other." The word settled into Lily's heart like a promise. Family. She hadn't known what that word truly meant until now. It wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who showed up for you, who cared for you when you had nothing, and who helped you rebuild when the world had torn you apart. That evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle above, the three of them sat together on the porch of the cabin, watching the sky turn dark. Sarah had joined them, her face bright with joy, and Lily felt the warmth of the moment seep deep into her bones. Jonah had given them more than just a cabin. He had given them a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of a new beginning. As the night grew darker and the fire in the hearth flickered softly, Lily leaned back in her chair and sighed contentedly. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She knew they were exactly where they were meant to be, and with that thought, Lily closed her eyes, letting the peace of the ranch settle around her like a warm, comforting blanket. She was home.